You were never supposed to hear this story, and if you do, your life will never feel the same again. Picture this. A bride in her dress of white lace, a smile that seemed like hope incarnate, walking willingly into a tomb. Not dragged, not chained, not forced, at least not at first. She went because it was tradition, because the Dreadmoor family had rules that were older than the town of Millfield itself, older even than the stones of St. Agnes Cemetery. Rules etched in whispers, passed down through generations, where joy was never allowed to exist without a shadow. June 16th, 1973. Catherine Dreadmoor was supposed to be preparing for the happiest day of her life. The town was celebrating Founder's Day. The air smelled of cherry pie and cut grass. Radios played soft love songs, but Catherine, radiant in her grandmother's gown, felt the pull of something darker. Her family had told her it was custom. Every Dreadmoor bride must bring flowers to the crypt the night before her wedding, to honor the dead, to bind the living to the bloodline. So she went, and she never came back. Her car was found by the gates, bouquet on the seat, keys still in the ignition. But Catherine herself, gone. The police searched the graves, the woods, the roads. Families lit lanterns, whispering her name through the darkness. But the truth was already buried, in stone, in secrecy, in a vault her family swore had been sealed for decades. It would take nearly half a century before anyone dared break it open. And when they did, they discovered Catherine, still in her wedding dress, sealed alive inside the wall of her own family's crypt. Her nails had clawed at the stone, her locket lay against her breastbone. She had died trying to escape. Do you feel it? That chill in your spine? That's not just the tragedy of a girl betrayed by her own blood. It's the realization that behind every pleasant small town, every perfect family portrait, there may be a crypt waiting to be opened, and inside it, not just bones, but the truths no one ever wanted you to see. The Dreadmoor wedding wasn't just a crime of passion. It wasn't just an accident. It was the perfect mirror of something much larger, much older, an ancient pattern that repeats whenever power, secrecy, and bloodlines intertwine. What you're about to hear isn't just the tale of Catherine's last night. It's the revelation of a system designed to control, to manipulate, to keep people obedient, even when it leads them straight into their own grave. The Dreadmoors didn't invent this curse. They were simply another vessel for it, another family chosen to carry the shadow of traditions too dark to be written down. And now, you are chosen to hear it. I need you to understand. This isn't entertainment. This isn't just another ghost story or true crime. This is an initiation. Once you step into this story, once you look into the crypt with me, you can't unsee what's inside, because Catherine wasn't the first bride to go missing. She wasn't the first woman to vanish in lace and pearls, swallowed by the family vault. That's why the Dreadmoors had their tradition. That's why brides were led to the crypt with flowers, because it was never about memory. It was about sacrifice. Do you think Catherine knew? Did she feel it in the pit of her stomach as she placed her hand on the cold iron door? Did she sense that the smiling faces around her were hiding something unholy? Or was she like so many others, blind until it was too late, trusting the hands that would betray her, walking willingly into the jaws of her own bloodline? That, my friend, is the question every man should ask himself. Who holds the keys to your crypt? Whose traditions are you following without even knowing what waits at the end of them? Because here is the first truth. You were never meant to know. The Dreadmoor crypt was not built as a resting place. It was built as a chamber, a mechanism of silence, a stone box for those who dared to step out of line. And Catherine's screams, muffled by stone, unheard by the town, were the echoes of a deeper law, one older than Connecticut, older than America itself. The family comes before the individual. You think you are free. You think you are your own man. But tell me, how many of your choices are yours, and how many are chains passed down by blood, by culture, by unseen hands that expect you to obey without question? Catherine's crypt is not just hers, it's ours. It's the metaphor we all live in, every day, without ever daring to knock on the walls. And tonight, we will knock. Stay with me, because what I am about to reveal will drag you deeper, step by step, until you see the machinery behind the mask. until you understand why Catherine Dreadmoor's death was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a cycle that is still unfolding right now, in your life, in mine, in every man who thinks he is free. This is where the descent begins. You remember the iron door? Heavy, cold, rust bleeding down its hinges. Everyone in town thought it was locked for decades. A relic. Just decoration. But the truth was simpler and more disturbing. That door was never locked from the outside. It was locked from within. Think about that. A family vault that could be opened, entered, and sealed shut again without leaving a trace. A place designed not just to hold the dead, but to swallow the living. Catherine stepped inside carrying flowers, her dress brushing against the stone floor, her breath clouding faintly in the cool subterranean air. She thought she was performing a ritual of remembrance, but what she was actually doing was walking into the blueprint of her own destruction. And here is the part they never tell you in school, in church, in polite conversation over coffee. Families like the Dreadmoors don't exist in isolation. They are part of something larger, nodes in a network, faces in a lineage that values bloodline above truth, reputation above morality, silence above justice. The Dreadmoors had power in Millfield, a pharmacy that controlled the medicine, a church that shaped the soul, a Victorian house that looked down on the rest of town. They smiled at parades, they handed out scholarships, they shook hands at the diner. But behind the veneer was an old-world truth. Family comes first, even when the family is a coffin. That's why no one asked the real questions when Catherine disappeared. Why was the crypt door ajar that night when it had supposedly been sealed for years? Why were there fresh mortar lines in the wall that didn't match the original construction? Why did every clue point back to the cemetery, yet the investigation moved elsewhere? Because the Dreadmoors owned silence, and silence is more powerful than guns, more permanent than chains. Silence kills by omission. It buries without dirt. Do you see the pattern now? Catherine wasn't just a victim of her cousin's obsession. She was a victim of an entire structure of control. Charles Dreadmoor was just the tool. The system itself was the killer. Let me show you how it works. First, there is tradition. Tradition is the mask power wears to keep people obedient. It's just what we do, they say. It's always been this way. Catherine wore her grandmother's dress, carried her mother's flowers, walked into the family crypt because tradition demanded it. She obeyed without question, and tradition swallowed her alive. Second, there is appearance. The Dreadmoors looked respectable, churchgoers, community leaders. Who would suspect them of hiding their sins in stone? No one dared. Appearances shield predators better than walls. And the more respectable the mask, the darker the secret it hides. Third, there is denial. When Catherine vanished, the family didn't scream for investigations to dig into their crypt. They let the town chase shadows, ex-boyfriends, jealous rivals, strangers passing through. They fed the police convenient suspects, offered distractions, shed crocodile tears. Meanwhile, the truth lay right beneath their feet. Tradition, appearance, denial. The three pillars of silence. The system repeats, generation after generation, until someone dares to break the pattern. Catherine tried. Her fingernails clawed at stone until they snapped, but she couldn't break it alone. And here's the dangerous truth, the one that burns once you see it. Catherine's story is not unique. The Dreadmoor crypt is not a singular horror. It is a metaphor for every institution that swallows the innocent while pretending to honor them. Governments seal away whistleblowers and call them traitors. Corporations silence truth-tellers and call it non-disclosure. Families bury abuse under the words, "Don't shame us." The crypt has many forms, but it always works the same way. You walk in willingly because you trust. You seal yourself in because you obey. And by the time you realize the walls are closing, it's too late. Tell me, how many crypts have you walked into? How many times have you obeyed without asking why? How many traditions have you followed, smiling, unaware that they were built to trap you? Catherine's scream is your warning. It echoes not just from 1973, not just from St. Agnes Cemetery, but from every system designed to use you, consume you, bury you. And here is where the descent deepens. Catherine wasn't chosen at random. Families like the Dreadmoors always choose their victims carefully. They choose those who shine brightest, those who have potential to change the script. Catherine was educate, ambitious, hopeful. She wanted to teach children, shape futures. She had vision. And what do systems of control fear the most? Not mediocrity, not obedience. They fear the spark. They fear the one who might ignite others. They fear the person who thinks for themselves. That's why she had to be silenced. Every age has its Catherines. Every generation has its chosen sacrifice. The bright one who walks into the crypt, not knowing she is carrying the weight of centuries of suppression on her shoulders. Do you see now why this story is dangerous? Because once you recognize the pattern, you start to see it everywhere. You realize that the crypt is not just a tomb. It's a template, a method of control that has been used for millennia by families, by religions, by empires. And you, listening to me right now, are standing at the door of your own crypt. Will you walk in willingly? Or will you break the tradition, smash the mask of appearance, and tear down the denial before it seals around you? Catherine's locket was found against her chest, holding the photo of the man she loved. Even as the walls closed in, she clung to hope. Hope is powerful, but hope without awareness is a coffin. You must have both, awareness to see the crypt for what it is, and strength to choose differently. This is only the beginning. We've only brushed the surface of the Dreadmoor curse. In the next descent, I will show you how Catherine's bloodline carried secrets far older than 1973, secrets tied to Europe's oldest burial rites, secrets that reveal why the Dreadmoors built their crypt as more than a grave. And once you hear it, you'll never look at a cemetery the same way again. Catherine's body was sealed in stone in 1973, but the crypt itself had been waiting for her for centuries. That's the part people miss. They think her cousin Charles lost his mind, that her death was just obsession and cruelty. But the walls of the Dreadmoor crypt were carved long before Catherine was born. Every line of mortar, every cut of granite was a message. This chamber was not built for peace, but for offering. And if you trace the history of the Dreadmoor family far enough back, you find their roots tangled in Europe's oldest soil. The Dreadmoors were not American in origin. They came from Devonshire, England, in the early 1700s, carrying more than luggage and linens. They brought with them a ritual, a legacy older than Protestant churches, older than colonial towns. You see, in rural England, there were families who claimed authority not from law, not from crown, but from lineage. They whispered that their blood carried something special, a mark, a curse, a blessing. They called it by many names, but always it demanded sacrifice. Some families drowned their chosen in rivers, tying stones around their waists. Some bricked them into walls, believing their suffering would keep the house strong. Some bound brides in white, sealing them into the earth to ensure fertility for the bloodline. Do you feel the pattern now? Catherine was not the first. She was part of a chain that stretched back through centuries, each link forged in bone and silence. The Dreadmoors simply transplanted that chain to American soil. Their crypt in Millfield was not just a burial vault. It was a continuation of that English ritual, a place where a living body, sealed in stone, became an offering to the family name. And here's the part no one dares speak. Rituals like this don't survive by accident. They survive because they work, not in the sense of magic wands and fairy tales, but in the cold logic of power. Families who practiced them prospered, their farms thrived, their children inherited wealth while neighbors starved. The Dreadmoors themselves became pillars of Millfield, landowners, businessmen, church deacons. Coincidence? Or did every sealed bride, every sacrificed voice become the foundation on which the family stood? Ask yourself this. How much of history has been built not by progress, not by fairness, but by ritual silences? How many bloodlines thrived because someone else was bricked alive in their basement? Catherine's story is not folklore. It is a modern echo of a pattern humanity has never broken. Look closer at the details. The locket found on her chest was inscribed with a date, June 17th, 1973, her wedding day. Why inscribe the date before the ceremony took place? unless someone already knew she would never live to see it, unless the locket itself was part of the offering, and the dress she wore handed down from her grandmother. Did you know the gown's seams had been altered, resewn in places that didn't match ordinary tailoring? Fabric stitched not for beauty, but for ritual use. Some believed the gown itself carried the memory of prior brides, worn again and again, as if the fabric was feeding on their despair. This is what the descent reveals. Objects are not just objects. They become vessels. The crypt was a vessel. The dress was a vessel. Catherine herself was the vessel, all designed to contain suffering, to hold silence, to feed the family name. Do you think this is just superstition? Then explain why the Dreadmoors remained untouchable for decades, why their businesses flourished while others failed, why their church pews were always full, even when scandals whispered around them. You see, the family didn't just build wealth, they built loyalty, power, control. Catherine's death was the hidden price of that stability. And if you believe this only happened in Millfield, you're not looking closely enough. Look at the catacombs beneath Paris, filled with bones arranged in patterns. Look at the walled-in skeletons discovered in castles across Europe. Look at the foundation sacrifices unearthed in Ireland, where children's remains were found beneath ancient structures. Different countries, different names, but the same pattern, the living sealed away to strengthen the bloodline, the house, the institution. Catherine was not a ghost story. She was the American face of a European curse. Now, here's where it becomes dangerous for you, because once you recognize the pattern, you stop asking, why Catherine, and start asking, who's next? Traditions like these don't die out, they adapt. Families stop sealing brides in stone, but they still seal away voices. They silence the inconvenient. They sacrifice the bright ones. Instead of a crypt, maybe it's a psychiatric ward, maybe it's a prison cell, maybe it's a reputation destroyed online. Different methods, same outcome. The ritual continues, and here is the third truth you were never meant to know. Catherine's crypt was not just a place of death, it was a signal, a declaration to every member of the family. This is what happens if you disobey. Imagine growing up with that knowledge, even if it was never spoken aloud. Imagine being a child in the Dreadmoor household, passing the cemetery every Sunday, knowing your cousin had vanished into its walls. Would you ever rebel? Would you ever speak too loudly? That's how control works. Not through open threats, but through whispered warnings, through stories buried in stone, through the memory of Catherine's nails scratching at granite. And the final horror? Catherine herself may have known all of this. The night before her wedding, as she placed the flowers on the crypt's altar, maybe she felt the weight of all the brides before her. Maybe she realized she wasn't the first and she wouldn't be the last. Maybe that's why her nails tore into the walls, because she was clawing not just for herself, but for every silenced voice before her. Do you understand now why her story cannot be dismissed as just another crime? Catherine is a key, a door. Through her, you can see the machinery of bloodline rituals, still spinning, still fed by silence. And this descent is not over, because the deeper you go, the more you realize that Catherine's crypt was not the end of the Dreadmoor story. It was the beginning of something darker. The family did not just bury her, they built upon her. And in the next step down, I will show you how Catherine's death became the cornerstone for the Dreadmoor's expansion, how one woman sealed alive gave birth to an empire of silence, and how that empire still casts its shadow across America today. The crypt was never just hers, it was ours. When Catherine was discovered in the crypt decades later, people whispered, how could the family do this to their own? But that question misses the point. The family didn't see her as their own. They saw her as their cornerstone. You must understand, in the logic of bloodline rituals, the individual is meaningless. Only the line matters. And when Catherine was sealed in stone, she wasn't simply removed, she was converted, transformed from a living woman into a permanent silence, a kind of raw currency the Dreadmoors could spend to secure their legacy. That's why the family prospered after 1973. The pharmacy tripled its holdings. The church annex expanded, drawing in donations from across the county. Dreadmoor's sons and daughters slipped effortlessly into positions of influence, school boards, town councils, even state offices. Was this coincidence? Or was Catherine's sacrifice the ignition point of their rise? Look closely at the timeline. In the months following her disappearance, Millfield's economy seemed to bend toward the Dreadmoors. A rival business burned down in an accident. A zoning law shifted in their favor. Loans that strangled others were mysteriously forgiven for them, as if the family had been shielded, protected. Sacrifice wasn't superstition, it was transaction. And here is the shadow no one dares admit. Every system of power feeds on sacrifice, always. You think corporations thrive because of efficiency? No, they thrive because they consume workers' health and time, burning lives as fuel. You think nations endure through progress? No, they endure because soldiers are thrown into graves, their silence exchanged for borders and flags. The Dreadmoors were simply more honest. They made their sacrifice visible, then hid it behind stone, and the crypt became more than a vault. It became a message to the entire family. This is how we endure. This is why we survive while others collapse. Do you see how control grows? A single act of horror becomes a myth becomes tradition becomes loyalty, and loyalty becomes empire. Catherine's silence did not stay in Millfield. It rippled outward. Generations of Dreadmoors used her as a shield. Whenever scandal threatened, whenever questions grew too loud, the story of Catherine, the whispered warning, kept mouths shut. The family knew no one would risk ending up like her. That's how silence multiplies, not through force, but through memory. Catherine's tomb wasn't just stone, it was propaganda. And here is the next truth you were never meant to know. Catherine's sacrifice was repeated, not always in stone, not always in a gown, but the pattern endured. In 1984, her cousin Lillian vanished after questioning family finances. Her body was never found. In 1992, a Dreadmoor son died in an accident after revealing he planned to testify against local officials. In 2007, a niece disappeared on her way home from college, last seen arguing with an uncle about inheritance. Different methods, same outcome. The crypt was still open, just invisible now. That's how power evolves. You don't need stone walls once fear has already been cemented into blood. Think about your own life. Do you know families where one voice is always missing? A relative who went away and was never spoken of again? A cousin who asked too many questions and was quietly erased from photographs, from conversations, from memory? That's the crypt at work. You don't need mortar and granite. You only need silence. And silence is everywhere. The Dreadmoors used Catherine to buy stability. Corporations use ruined workers to buy profit. Governments use vanished dissidents to buy order. Churches use silenced victims to buy piety. Different masks, same transaction. Do you see now why I told you this is not just entertainment? You are not an observer. You are part of the pattern. Somewhere in your life, someone has already been sealed away to keep the rest obedient. Maybe it was a whistleblower at your company, fired and blacklisted. Maybe it was a relative, shamed until they disappeared. Maybe it was you, silenced, dismissed, told your voice didn't matter. That's the crypt whispering through time. Catherine's nails clawed stone, yours claw at invisible walls. But the system doesn't care. Silence is silence, whether carved in granite or typed into resignation letters. The Dreadmoors knew this. That's why they expanded. By the late 20th century, they had influence not just in Millfield, but in Hartford, Boston, Washington. Their children became lawyers, bankers, politicians, and everywhere they went, they carried the lesson of Catherine. A single sacrifice can secure an empire. And that, my friend, is the real curse. Not the walls, not the rituals, not the bloodlines. The curse is that it works. That's why the pattern repeats. That's why every age has its Catherine. Because silence is profitable. Because suffering feeds power. Because a single sealed bride in 1973 can ripple outward into boardrooms, campaigns, and laws passed in secret rooms. Do you feel the descent now? Do you feel how Catherine's scream is not a ghost, but a structure? Not haunting, but scaffolding. Every empire you admire, every dynasty you envy, every institution you obey, look closely. Somewhere beneath it, There is a crypt. And here's the final sting of this chapter. Catherine's story only came to light because the crypt was opened accidentally during a renovation. If not for that, her body would still be walled away, her silence still feeding the Dreadmoors unchecked, which forces the question, how many crypts remain sealed? How many Catherines have been icked away in cellars, erased in files, forgotten in hospitals, silenced in scandals? How many sacrifices continue, unseen, feeding the families, corporations, and governments we still bow to today? The descent is not finished, not yet, because if Catherine's silence birthed an empire, then what happens when all the crypts open at once? That's where we're heading, deeper, darker, into the collapse of silence itself. But first, you need to ask yourself, whose silence is feeding you right now? Whose crypt supports the ground you walk on? And how long before you hear the walls closing in around you? Stone doesn't last forever. Mortar crumbles, iron rusts. Even the deepest crypt will one day split open, and when it does, everything buried inside seeps out into the light. That's the truth the Dreadmoors feared most. Not the police, not the gossip of neighbors, not even God's judgment. They feared exposure. They feared the day the walls could no longer contain the silence they'd built their empire on. And that day came in 2019. A construction crew renovating St. Agnes Cemetery discovered the hairline cracks, dust falling from the wall, an odor escaping. When they pried the bricks loose, they did not find peace. They found Catherine, still in her wedding gown, mouth open as if still screaming, bouquet fragments crumbling to powder. It was like the earth itself had refused to keep the secret any longer. Do you understand the weight of that? For 46 years, her silence had held the family together. For 46 years, her absence had been an unspoken bond. But the moment she was found, the silence fractured. The pattern was exposed. And exposure is the one thing no system of control can survive. The Dreadmoors scrambled. Old men in suits rushed to manage the narrative. The family church issued a statement of grief. Cousins whispered that Catherine had been unstable, that she had done this to herself. The usual tricks: denial, distraction, distortion. But something had changed. The walls were open now. The evidence lay in plain sight, and people began asking questions that could not be silenced. Who else had disappeared? Why had the family prospered while Catherine vanished? Why had no one ever dared break the crypt sooner? And once those questions started, they spread. They didn't stop at Millfield. They rippled outward, into surrounding towns, into whispers about other families, other sealed crypts, other silences no one had dared break. That is the law of exposure. Once one wall cracks, the others weaken. Do you see the danger here? Every society, every institution, every family built on silence carries the same risk. Eventually, the silence collapses. The hidden voices come flooding back, and the empire built on them begins to fall apart. But collapse is never clean. When the silence breaks, the buried doesn't just reveal truth, it brings chaos. In Millfield, that chaos spread like disease. Businesses tied to the Dreadmoors began to crumble as lawsuits emerged. Old allies turned on them to save themselves. Neighbors whispered about the strange disappearances they'd ignored for years. What had been unthinkable, questioning the family, became contagious. Suddenly everyone remembered what they had once forced themselves to forget. That is the power of broken silos. Once one person dares to speak, everyone else remembers they have a voice too. And yet, here lies the darker truth. Exposure does not guarantee justice. Sometimes it brings something worse. When Catherine's body was revealed, the family didn't collapse overnight. They adapted, they hired new lawyers, they crafted new myths. They began presenting themselves as victims of an old family curse. They tried to reframe Catherine not as their shame, but as their branding, something they could own, something they could use, because that is the final instinct of systems of power. If they cannot silence, they will consume the exposure itself. They will repackage the horror, sell it as narrative, and turn it into another mask. And here is where the descent reaches its sharpest edge. You must ask yourself, what happens when all the crypts open at once? Because they will. They are. Across the world, silences are fracturing. The silences of abused children, finally speaking. The silences of workers, refusing to be consumed. The silences of entire nations, ripping open their censored histories. Everywhere, the walls are cracking, and the screams sealed away for centuries are beginning to echo again. But exposure is not the end. It is the beginning of collapse. And collapse is violent. When a crypt opens, it doesn't just release truth. It releases rage. It releases despair. It releases everything that was denied, compressed and buried. And that flood can drown more than the guilty. It can sweep away the innocent too. Think of it this way. Catherine's body was just one, but her silence represented thousands. When it cracked open, it wasn't just her voice that returned. It was the collective voice of every silenced woman in that lineage, every erased man, every vanished cousin. 46 years of rage bursting out in a single moment. Now imagine that on the scale of nations. Millennia of silence breaking all at once. Do you really think the structures built on those silences will survive? Do you think your government, your corporation, your church, your family will withstand the flood when all the crypts open? No, they will collapse. They must. And here is the most dangerous truth of all. Collapse is not an accident. It is the price, the debt that silence always accrues. Catherine's death bought the Dreadmoors 4 decades of prosperity. But the bill still came due. It always does. So ask yourself, who is paying your debt? Whose silence is buying your stability right now? A sibling? A co-worker? A stranger in another country you'll never meet? And when their crypt cracks open, when their silence collapses, will you be standing on the rubble or buried in it? Because the walls are thinner than you think. Catherine's scream still echoes, not because it is ghostly, but because silence amplifies what it tries to kill. Her fingernails scraping stone are louder now than they ever were in 1973. Her body, found decades too late, speaks more powerfully than her living voice ever could. This is what the descent teaches. Silence is never eternal. It always cracks. And when it does, it doesn't free just one. It frees everything. The Dreadmoor family learned that too late. Their empire, built on Catherine's sealed voice, is crumbling. But the larger empires, the older dynasties, the global crypts, those are still standing, for now, and that is where we are going next. Because Catherine's crypt is not just a family story, it is a rehearsal, a small-scale model of what happens when an entire civilization's silences finally burst open. And when that collapse comes, it will not be a bride in a dress. It will be all of us. Catherine's crypt was only one chamber, one silence, one wound in stone. But do not be deceived into thinking the horror ends in Millfield. The truth is much larger, much older. Everywhere you look, the world is built on crypts. Not the kind you visit on Sunday walks, not the kind where roses are laid and prayers are whispered. No, I'm talking about crypts of silence, crypts of erased voices, buried truths and sacrifices made invisible so the surface above could look stable. Think about history. How much of it do you really know? How many stories were sealed away before you were even born? The textbooks gave you clean lines, easy victories, simple heroes. But the truth is jagged, blood-soaked, bricked over. Entire civilizations have Catherine Dreadmoors hidden in their walls. Look at the great empires of the past. Rome, Egypt, China, Britain. Their monuments still stand. Their legacies still shape our lives. But beneath every marble column lies a silence. The slaves who built it, the conquered who vanished, the women sealed into traditions so their names would never stain the record. The crypt is not unique to Millfield. It is the foundation of civilization itself. And here is the terrifying symmetry. The bigger the empire, the deeper the crypt. The more glorious the monument, the more bones sealed beneath its stone. You live among crypts every day, in your city's monuments, in your nation's myths, in your family's unspoken histories. Silence is not the exception, it is the rule. Do you see how this connects? Catherine's scream is the echo of all silenced voices. The nails she dragged across stone are the same as the hands that built pyramids, the same as the mouths gagged by inquisitions, the same as the workers whose graves were unmarked so the skyscraper could rise. And all of it points to one truth. Silence feeds power. But power cannot hold silence forever. Every crypt eventually cracks. You've seen it. Scandals erupting after decades of cover-ups. Entire institutions crumbling when a single victim dares to speak. Archives opened after centuries, revealing atrocities that had been buried as necessary for order. It's happening faster now. The walls are thinner, the cracks are spreading, because the world is louder than it used to be. Secrets don't stay sealed. A whisper becomes a broadcast. A photograph hidden in a basement becomes evidence on a global stage. The same force that kept Catherine hidden for decades, silence, is dying. And that should terrify you. Because silence is not just oppression, it is also order. It holds chaos back. When silence collapses, all the voices return at once, not neatly, not cleanly, but violently, like floodwater bursting through a dam. Imagine it. Every crypt of history opening, every silenced worker, every vanished dissident, every erased culture, every buried child, all screaming at once. What would happen to the structures above them? To the governments, the corporations, the families, the religions that stood tall only because those silences held them up? They would fall. They must fall. Because you cannot keep building on sealed crypts without one day facing the avalanche beneath. The Dreadmoors thought they were safe. They believed Catherine's silence would hold forever. They thought mortar and reputation were enough, and for 46 years it was. But 46 years is a blink in the span of history. Do you think your nation is stronger than a crypt? Do you think your family is cleaner, your church purer, your business safer? No, they all carry silences, and each silence has a timer built into it. The question is not if it will break. The question is when. And here is the sharpest edge of this descent. Collapse is not something to fear. Collapse is something to recognize as inevitable. The only choice is whether you stand blind when it comes, or whether you see the cracks forming now. Because if you see them, you can prepare. If you see them, you can step aside before the walls fall. If you see them, you might even help the collapse happen faster, not to destroy, but to cleanse. Catherine's crypt is not just tragedy, it is prophecy. It shows us what happens when silence finally breaks. The horror, the chaos, the rage, but also the release, the truth unsealed, the voices finally free. And here is the final truth you were never meant to know. The crypts are opening already. You can hear it if you listen. In the sudden confessions of families, in the cracks in governments, in the lawsuits corporations cannot bury, in the archives pulled out of locked rooms. The dead are not staying silent anymore. The sealed are clawing through. Catherine was only the beginning. The descent is almost complete. We followed her into the vault, watched her body become empire, watched silence become collapse. But one step remains. Because now you must face the final door. What happens when your crypt opens? When the silences that shaped you, your family's secrets, your culture's hidden crimes, your society's buried sacrifices, burst out into the light. When that happens, there will be no empire left to protect you, no tradition to excuse you, no appearance to hide behind. There will only be the truth. And the truth will not ask permission. It will not wait for comfort. It will come like Catherine's scream, unstoppable, echoing through stone, through history, through you. The descent ends where it always does, with the collapse of silence. And once the silence collapses, nothing will ever be the same. You've followed Catherine into the dark. You've watched the walls close around her. You've seen her silence become empire, then fracture into collapse, then echo across the world. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. This story isn't just about Catherine. It isn't just about the Dreadmoors. It isn't even about Millfield. It's about you. You live inside a crypt too. Don't deny it. Listen closely. The air you breathe is too heavy. The walls around you are too close. Somewhere inside you a scream has been sealed away for years, maybe decades. And every day you choose silence, you thicken the mortar. Every time you bite your tongue, every time you hide the truth, every time you pretend, you add another brick. Until one day, you wake up and realize you're entombed. This is the final descent, not into Catherine's crypt, but into your own. Ask yourself, whose silence did you inherit? Was it your mother's, too afraid to speak her rage? Was it your father's, hiding shame under tradition? Was it a sibling's secret, a teacher's abuse, a culture's lie. Because silence is contagious. It doesn't start with you. It passes down like disease, like heirloom, like curse. You didn't choose your crypt. It was given to you, and every time you repeat the silence, you become its keeper. Think about it. What truths do you know but refuse to speak? What histories do you carry but refuse to uncover? What screams have you swallowed so deeply that you almost believe they were never there at all? That is your crypt. And here's the part that should terrify you. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how much you deny it. The crypt always cracks. Maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, maybe long after you're gone. But one day the silence will break, and when it does, what will come out? Will it be a whisper, a truth finally told, freeing you and those after you? Or will it be a flood, years of rage and grief bursting all at once, drowning everyone around you? That is the choice you're making right now with every silence you keep. Because Catherine was not a monster. She was not a symbol. She was not even a tragedy. She was a mirror. Her sealed scream is yours. Her scratched fingernails are yours. Her 46 years of silence are yours. The descent doesn't end in her crypt. It ends in your body, in your breath, in the words you refuse to release. Do you feel it yet? The pressure behind your ribs? The things you've never said? The histories you've never questioned? That's your stone wall. That's your sealed door. And you already know. Silence doesn't last. So here is the final truth. You are not just listening to a story. You are inside one. Right now. You are standing in the crypt. The air is thinning. The bricks are closing. The silence is building. And you have two choices. You can stay still. Pretend it isn't real. Wait for the collapse. Let your silence fester until it consumes you, until the next generation finds your sealed mouth and says, "Why didn't they speak?" Or, you can claw at the walls now. You can risk the noise, risk the exposure, risk the collapse on your own terms. You can scream before the stone seals completely, but if you wait too long, if you convince yourself the crypt is comfort, then the scream will escape without you. It will come after you're gone, and it will not be kind, because silence does not forgive. It collects interest. The Dreadmoors learned this too late. Catherine's scream destroyed them decades after her death. They thought they'd outlasted it. They thought silence was protection, but silence is never protection. It is only delay. And what about you? What silences are you delaying? Your family's secrets? Your society's lies? Your own buried grief? Every silence is a crypt. Every crypt cracks. And when it does, you won't be standing safely outside, watching like a story. You'll be inside, with the scream. That's where the descent ends, not in Millfield, not in history, but in you. So I'll ask you again, and this time you can't look away. What happens when your crypt opens? What will escape? Will it be your salvation or your ruin? Because make no mistake, the walls are already cracking, and Catherine is not alone anymore. Her scream is echoing in your chest. Right now, silence is not absence. It is presence. A thick, suffocating presence that fills every corner once the sound is gone. That's what Catherine left behind. Not just a corpse in a crypt, not just a broken empire, but silence that spread like a contagion. Even now, after the walls split, after her bones were uncovered, the silence remains. It lingers in Millfield, it lingers in the Dreadmoor ruins, and it lingers in you, because silence does not die with discovery, it adapts. Ask yourself, how many times have you heard a scream, then convinced yourself it was nothing? How many times have you seen a crack, then walked away because it was easier not to look? That is silence at work, not forced by others, chosen by you, and that's the real horror. Not Catherine locked away by her family, not the Dreadmoors building their empire on her stillness. The real horror is how familiar it feels, how ordinary, how much it looks like your life. Because you do it too. You silence yourself when you're afraid of judgment. You silence others when you look away from their pain. You let silence pass down to your children when you refuse to speak truths you've buried. You are not outside the crypt. You are one of its builders, one of its guards, one of its heirs. And maybe you're thinking, no, not me. I would have spoken. I would have saved Catherine. I would never seal a scream in stone. But look closer. Every time you've said, It's not my place. You've laid a brick. Every time you've said, they'll never believe me, you've added mortar. Every time you've said, better to keep the peace, you've turned the key, and the crypt closes tighter. Do you understand now? Catherine's story is not distant. It is not past. It is not a single horror you can walk away from. It is the shape of silence itself, the same silence you breathe, the same silence you feed. And silence is hungry. It will eat everything, your truth, your courage, your voice, until you are as hollow as Catherine's bones, until you are nothing but a sealed scream, waiting to be discovered decades too late. That's why her scream still echoes, not because she is restless, not because she is cursed, but because she is unfinished. Because every silence left unbroken gives her voice another chamber to haunt. You can hear it now if you sit still. Listen, the faint scrape against stone, the sound of nails pulling at brick, the muffled cry that rises from beneath the noise of your everyday life. That is Catherine. That is the millions like her. That is you. The echo will follow you out of this story, into your home, into your bed, into your breath. It will wait for the moment you are still enough to notice, and then it will press against your chest, reminding you the crypt is already closing. And here is the most terrifying part. You still have time. Not much, but some. You can still choose to scream now. You can still crack your own silence before it seals completely. You can still tell the truth you've buried, speak the name you've swallowed, ask the question you've avoided. But every day you wait, the mortar hardens. Every night you choose silence, the walls grow thicker. Every moment you delay, Catherine's fate becomes more yours. And if you wait too long, then the scream will outlive you. It will claw through after your death, but by then it will not save you. It will only expose you. That is the lesson the Dreadmoors never understood. They thought silence was power. They thought silence would protect them. They thought silence would last. It never does. Silence is always temporary, always fragile, always ticking like a clock. And when it breaks, the sound is not gentle, it is not cleansing, it is catastrophic. You've heard it before. In scandals, in collapses, in truths dragged into daylight after decades of denial. That is the sound of crypts opening. That is the sound of silences expiring. And it is coming for you too. The only choice is how it breaks. Quietly, through your own voice, or violently, through collapse you can no longer control. So the epilogue is simple. Catherine's crypt is not the end. It is the beginning, the first crack, the first echo, the first warning. The question is not whether the crypts will open. The question is, will you open yours before it consumes you? Because make no mistake, you are already inside, and Catherine is still screaming, not behind stone anymore, not beneath the Dreadmoor's empire anymore. She is screaming through you, right now. Listen, do you hear it?